I do want to welcome everyone to a forum on a dialogue dedicated to education and action as we honor the legacies of peacemaking and whistleblowing embodied by no other than Daniel Ellsberg. His courageous act of whistleblowing, disclosing the Pentagon Papers to the public, exposed government misconduct and shaped our history. As we gather here today, we're also reminded of Ellsberg's moving words, when I say, and I quote, when I say that there is a step that could reduce the risk of nuclear war significantly that has not been taken but could easily be taken, that is the elimination of American ICBMs, end quote. His call to action resonates with urgency as we confront the escalating threats posed by nuclear weapons. Recent atrocities in Gaza serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of conflict and highlight the urgent need for peace. The unfortunate ongoing violence resulting in the death of over 30,000 Palestinians, primarily women and children, at the hands of the IDF and leaving more than 70,000 wounded is cause for grave concern. This situation has the potential to unfortunately escalate into a regional war with catastrophic consequences for all involved. Additionally, we are witnessing a growing movement of peacemaking and anti-war activists, students participating in college encampments, advocating for peace, and calling for an end to US imperialism and divestment from perpetual wars. With that said, let us honor Daniel Ellsberg's legacy by taking meaningful action to address the root causes of conflict and promote a more just and peaceful world for our future generations. I do want to thank our esteemed speakers, no other than Norman Soloman, RootsAction's co-founder, Professor Christian Appy, Pastor Michael McBride, Emma Claire Foley, Dr. Assal, Jeffrey Sterling, and the beloved son of Daniel Ellsberg, Robert Ellsberg, who's with us tonight. I'm sending my gratitude to my esteemed colleague, Bill Lackemacher, who was just recently here. Unfortunately, he won't be joining us throughout the call. He is under the weather, but he's done all the tech behind the scene work, which can be very tedious. So we're very grateful to have him. And also Ryan Black, who is an organizer with RootsAction and Defuse Nuclear War, who will join us at the end of the call to discuss the Daniel Ellsberg Week of Action from June 10th to June 16th and how you can all get involved. So please do stick around because we have a beautiful program. We have a full program. And so without further ado, I would love to introduce our first speaker, Norman Soloman, who's my mentor, my colleague, and someone that I look up to. Norman is a journalist, author, and an activist known for his insightful commentary on American foreign policy and media ethics. Norman is also the founder of the Institute for Public Accuracy and co-founder of RootsAction.org with over 1 million online supporters. His latest book, War Made Invisible, How America Hides the Human Toll of Its Military Machine, exposes the manipulation of public opinion during times of conflict. Norman, please do take it away.
Well, many thanks to you, Hanieh, for organizing our event, our gathering tonight. And thanks to everybody participating. We're all very aware that overseas and here in the United States, there's tremendous turmoil. And whether we talk about nuclear weapons or other aspects of militarism, the message from Dan Ellsberg was most profound during his life, the last 52 years that he devoted to action, to analysis, to a process of dialogue and confronting what is really difficult to even conceive of. The militarism that was unleashed in Southeast Asia during the war there so many decades ago, so many wars since, and now we're facing a sort of a concentric combination of so much adherence to violence, of from the top down reliance on authority that's not moral authority, it's the opposite. And so this gathering this evening is really an opportunity to not only share and assess our analysis, information, and our emotional responses, but also to plan to take action. And I'm really excited that the RootsAction Education Fund and the Ellsberg Initiative for Peace and Democracy are co-sponsoring Daniel Ellsberg Week. It will fall on the middle of June 10th to 16th, and it really overlaps, among other aspects on the calendar, the June 12th, 1982 protest in New York City in Central Park, 1 million people who gathered. And also it will mark the 1 year since Dan passed away. We really have an opportunity to utilize Daniel Ellsberg Week to challenge the deep basis for militarism that's just so powerfully present all around us, and not only the U.S. role in literally arming the slaughter in Gaza, the escalation of warfare in the region, and also we're seeing now, as we have in the past, the way in which, as Dr. King said, the bombs in Vietnam were exploding at home, and the violence that the United States is directly making possible in Gaza is also being mirrored on college campuses and elsewhere here. So I just want to sort of close by saying that we have a lot of tools for organizing towards the middle of June, and I'm really excited about a lot of the ideas. If you go to Diffuse Nuclear War and you click on events, you'll get to the Daniel Ellsberg Week page. Just has a overflow of specific actions that people can take. I'll just mention a few of them briefly. There are templates for people to go to city councils, county commissions, state legislatures, asking them to declare Daniel Ellsberg Week, and also to go with the template we have as well to people with the power to name or rename libraries and streets and schools. For the long term, to think of the need to inform people who often are simply uninformed because they rely on news media or traditional textbooks. There should be Daniel Ellsberg high schools and Daniel Ellsberg libraries and Daniel Ellsberg boulevards across the country. That helps us to continue to inform people and answer the question that some people very young now or not so young might ask, well, who is Daniel Ellsberg? And it's an opportunity for us. We also, of course, are facilitating picket lines, protests, civil disobedience, teach-ins, all sorts of different ways to push back against the militarism that is not only killing and maiming so many people right now in various parts of the world, but foreshadow and fuel the momentum towards the ultimate violence of nuclear war. Again, just thanks very much for being with us this evening, and look forward to working together.
Thank you, Norman. And just to piggyback off of what Norman just shared with us, this event that we have that we're hosting and organizing for Daniel Ellsberg's Week of Action, which is again from June 10th to June 16th, is really following up on our success in 2023 and our Week of Action for Daniel Ellsberg. With that said, Brian Black, who's my colleague, will share more information about what we have planned for the Week of Action. So please do stay with us. But it brings me joy to introduce my next guest, Christian Appy, Professor Christian Appy, who is a director of Ellsberg Initiative for Peace and Democracy. He received his bachelor at Amherst College and his PhD at Harvard University, both in American Studies. He is best known for his books on the Vietnam War, A Social History of American Combat Soldiers, a wide-ranging oral history from multiple perspectives, which includes accounts of Vietnamese and American combatants, policymakers, anti-war activists, journalists, and etc., and a history of the war's impact on American national identity, culture, and foreign policy from the 1950s through the Obama administration. He's currently working on a book about Daniel Ellsberg based largely on his papers, and the working title is Ellsberg's Mutiny, War, and Resistance in the Age of Vietnam, the Pentagon Papers, and Nuclear Terror. Please take it away.
Thanks so much. I think others may speak more specifically about Dan's relevance to our current situation, but I thought I'd take the opportunity to say a bit more about Dan himself. As Hanieh said, in 1971, he released to the press and public the 7,000-page secret history of the Vietnam War that was soon called the Pentagon Papers, that exposed more than 2 decades of government lies about the causes and conduct of the American war in Vietnam. And for that act of moral courage, he was indicted on a dozen felony charges and faced a possible 115-year prison sentence. He was the first American criminally charged and tried under the 1917 Espionage Act for conveying classified documents not to a foreign government or agent, but to the American people. No other official during the Vietnam War, with his level of access to power and privileged information, broke so radically with the government policies he had once supported, or jeopardized his career and personal freedom so completely in an effort to change those policies. It was really one of the great political and moral conversion stories in US history. So, it was heartening to read and listen to the many wonderful tributes that poured in last spring after Dan publicly announced his diagnosis of terminal cancer. However, in many ways, I think those tributes actually diminished the historical significance of Dan's activism in 2 significant ways, really. First, they often took his individual actions out of historical context, as if he were acting in a kind of political bubble all by himself. And second, they often failed to mention the radical depth of Dan's critique, not just of the Vietnam War, but ongoing US foreign policy and nuclear policy. In a way, it's not unlike how Martin Luther King is often celebrated in public memory. His life is often considered apart from the larger history of the civil rights and Black Power movements, and most tributes focus on the least radical aspects of his message, and almost always completely excise the memory of Dr. King's profound anti-Vietnam War critique. So too with Dan. He's often referred to as the nation's most famous whistleblower, and that may be true as far as it goes. But you think a little bit about the metaphor of a whistleblower, and it can be quite narrow. And it might make us think, for example, of a cop on the beat trying to uphold the law, or a referee in a basketball game seeking to preserve the rules of the games. But that hardly reflects Dan's radical critique of the status quo. He had, by late 1969, and increasingly over the years that followed, developed a serious critique of US imperialism. He had come to believe that he had previously been a professional counter-revolutionary, and he was committed to a profound transformation in the conduct of US foreign policy, with a much scaled back military and less interventionist, far more democratic, and also taking steps to lead toward the abolition of nuclear weapons. And it was hardly a cause he intended to pursue by himself. He was always encouraging and even goading others to join the struggle. Even when he was being arraigned in 1971 and a journalist asked him if he was worried about going to prison, he famously replied, "Wouldn't you go to prison to help end this war?" In the early 80s, he wrote a wonderful essay on anti-nuclear activism, which he titled A Call to Mutiny. And, as Norman said, after 1971, he spent the rest of his life inspiring countless activists with both his deep intellectual understanding of the world and his willingness to put his body on the line. He often quoted Henry David Thoreau's essay on civil disobedience, in which Thoreau writes, "Cast your whole vote, not a slip of paper merely, but your whole influence." And Dan was arrested some 80 times in acts of civil disobedience, and he devoted endless hours to inspiring, teaching, and supporting other activists, including just about every national security whistleblower of the 21st century. But Dan also always made clear that he too benefited from the example of others, especially younger activists of the 1960s, and in particular, the many thousands of people 2,300 young draft resistors, who might, many of them, have found other ways to avoid military service, but believed a more radical defiance of conscription might have greater impact. Well, it certainly did on Dan. In 1969, after hearing one of those resistors give a talk on his way to prison, Randy Keeler, Dan found himself overcome with emotion, crying uncontrollably in the men's room at the thought that the war was eating the young, that we were relying on them to fight the war and to end it. That's when he asked himself what he might be willing to do as he neared the age of 40 if he were willing to sabotage his career and risk imprisonment. Dan often said that without Randy Keeler and the larger movement he was a part of, he would never have had the courage to release the Pentagon Papers. He also often said, courage is contagious. I think he would have been deeply moved by the courage on display among young people today and the upsurge of in activism, not just against Israeli violence in Gaza and the West Bank, but against imperialism and militarism more generally, as well as the movement for climate justice. And let's hope inspired, he would welcome as well the rising movement against nuclear weapons. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I think he would be very proud if he was with us now, seeing all of the student organizing happening all across the country in over 90 college campuses now. And so with that, we'll segue into our next segment, which is about the faith leader involvement and the pastor, the clergy's involvement in the anti-war movement. And for that, I could not even think about any one better than introducing and having Pastor Michael McBride speak. Reverend Michael McBride is the executive director for Live Free USA, a national organizing and social change network committed to ending the criminalization of people of color, reducing gun violence, and transforming the policing and the criminal justice system. He was named by the Center of American Progress as the top clergy leader in 2013 and served on President Obama's Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships Council to address poverty and inequality in 2016. Recognized in 2022 as one of CNN's champions for change, he's a national leader in the movement to implement public health gun violence prevention programs. He is the co-founder of the Black Church PAC and the Black Brown Peace Consortium. Pastor Mike serves as the lead pastor of the Way Church in Berkeley, California. He has been frequent contributor to the New York Times, the Washington Post, MSNBC, CNN, the Huffington Post, and many other media outlets. He is also a board member of the Quincy Institute. Thank you, Pastor Mike, for doing the work that you're doing, especially and in particular in championing for peace in Gaza at the moment. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and your coalition work with other pastors across the country to promote peace and pretty much disarmament at this point. So.
Yes, well, it's just such an honor to be here, and to all my fellow panelists and comrades in the unending struggle to see peace overwhelm our world. It's an honor to share this space with you all. Most of my peacemaking work has been in the hood, and so I'm learning new names and new heroes by sharing this space with you all. And thanks for Hanieh for always throwing a brother in the ring. I will just say that we are predominantly Black church faith leaders. Obviously, there are many other faith leaders across the country, multi-faith, multiracial. Faith leaders who are weighing in and attempting to live out a consistent ethic of life and peace across all of the contexts in which we are conscious of. I will just say, as Black Christian faith leaders who are serving predominantly Black Americans in many neighborhoods across the country, that have, since our time in the United States, been very conscious of the ways in which state violence disproportionately visits our communities without accountability and without any discriminate purpose. It is particularly indiscriminate. It is very unyielding. It is consistent for the whole of our lives. And what we have consistently found as Black Americans in this country is there is always money for violence. We are people who believe or want to take seriously our sacred texts that say the words of Jesus, like, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Obviously, as I told a journalist the other day, Similar to a protest, our sacred texts can be often misused as well. If you show up to a protest or to a sacred text looking for a reason to excuse violence, you will often find one, because there are ways to manipulate everything for the purposes of mendacity, wickedness, and death. And at the same time, there are consistent through lines through our faith traditions that continue to compel the willing, those who want to be peacemakers, those who want to heal the hurt and the harm of the suffering, to find moral, spiritual, and certainly political power, and always people power, to ensure that we can indeed be peacemakers. To quote American president that we all know, President John F. Kennedy says that those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable. And so it is incumbent upon us to be people who are at every moment of our advocacy and our work, publicly and privately, figuring out how can we ensure that the mass systems change that needs to be unleashed across our country and across the world is being done with the greatest effort towards peace. And so the conflict that has been raging in Gaza, that many of us name to be a genocide, from the earliest weeks, about 3 weeks after the horrific attack on October 7th. Many of our Black faith Christian leaders, many of whom have been working with Palestinian and some Jewish and some Christian members who live in the West Bank, in Gaza, in Israel, in Palestine, working for a peaceful resolution to the decades of injustice that has been happening there. We immediately began to see through the images coming to us via social media that it was clear that if there was not an immediate ceasefire bilaterally between both between Hamas and between the Israeli forces, we told members in the White House and beyond that we would look up 6 or 7 months later and we would have tens of thousands of innocent civilians, mostly women and children, dead. We said from the beginning of this conflict in the earliest weeks that the bombing will have to stop eventually. Why not stop today? Why not put ourselves on a path towards peace today? And now we are 7 months, 6 months, 7 months, 200 days later. And not only are we seeing the continued indiscriminate mass loss of life in Gaza, we are now also seeing the ways in which the civil rights of American young people and others are now being eroded. And now the law enforcement apparatus is being turned on them as they are attempting to have a moral, principled voice calling for ceasefire, calling for divestment, calling for an end to the famine, the genocide in Gaza. I will just say that the faith leaders that we are working with, and many who are outside our immediate scope of influence, are not only appalled as to what we're seeing, but we are committed even the more to ensuring that there is a moral voice. There is a faith-infused movement to see the cessation of the kind of violence and militarized responses, not just here domestically, but certainly all across the world. I will also just say that we do believe, and I'm so grateful to the Quincy Institute, who has been a very powerful, powerful force for good of helping to educate and train and brief our faith leaders and clergy. For many of them, this is their first kind of foray into foreign affairs. And this has unlocked a certain consciousness now where these same clergy are also now making connections between the militarization that is happening in the Middle East, to parts of the continent of Africa, to parts of South America, and to Haiti, and to the Caribbean. There is a very important moment that we are now in where people are waking up. So I just want to encourage us all, even in the face of all of the despair, the death, the worry, the concern, the rise, it appears, of authoritarian and fascist and Christo-fascist and Christian nationalism, even as we are seeing this arise in this moment, I want to just encourage all of us to also acknowledge that there is another consciousness rising in this moment. People are rightly starting to see and name the contradictions, the propaganda, the lies, and the misinformation that are attempting to cause some to think that this is the only way to have peace in the world. No, there is another way. And the way many of us on this call are pioneers and or have taken the baton and are running with this baton. I want to encourage us to keep running with this baton and to keep finding ways to stand, particularly in solidarity with those most directly impacted in Gaza, in the West Bank, and in other places like Haiti and the Congo and the Sudan and Tigray and Chad. But also, let's not forget our young people who are a stone's throw away likely from all of us. These colleges and universities all across the country are sprouting up as a response to the repression and the overly militarized response to their peaceful protests. May we also show up for them and remind them that they are on the right side of history. It is a great gift to be with you all. There are some peacemaking clergy out here in the world, not just a bunch of warmongering right-wing Christo nationalists. No, there's a few of us who love peace and justice, and it's a great gift to be able to stand with you all. We're in solidarity. You are, and we are comrades. Thank you.
Woo. I'm going to take a moment to put myself together after that, but thank you so much for sharing those words of wisdom. It's really also very important to note that the oppression in Palestine, in Gaza, in the occupied territories did not begin in October 7th. It is as a result of 75 years of oppression. And thank you for the work that you do, Pastor Michael McBride. If there are any initiatives that you wish for us to join and help you with, including supporting your organization, and I do encourage all of our speakers to also do the same, please do list your organization in the chat. If we can donate to you, if we can amplify your work as RootsAction and Defuse Nuclear War, we're always ready to help support you. Now, you know, Robert, I think when you and I spoke briefly via email, when you sent me your bio, I mentioned to you how touched I was by reading about your experience during the time that your father was going through what he was going through, right? And we miss him tonight. We miss him so much. One of the most what would get me very excited when he was on was carving out 15 minutes just for him to speak, because he had so much to share, so much love to share, and so much information. And all of us were so eager to learn from him. So it's a blessing to have you with us tonight. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for bringing his spirit here with us and for us tonight. And it brings me nothing but great pleasure to introduce you to our audience. Robert Ellsberg is Daniel's eldest child. When he was 13, his father asked him to help copy the Pentagon Papers. When he was 19, he took a leave of 5 years from college to work with Dorothy Day, the radical Catholic pacifist at the Catholic Worker in New York City, and served as 2 years as managing editor of her newspaper. Robert has served for 37 years as editor-in-chief and publisher of Orbis Books, where he has published many of the leading Christian peacemakers of our time. Robert worked closely with his father in editing the 2 volumes of his memoir, Secrets, a memoir of Vietnam, and the Pentagon Papers and Doomsday Machine, Confessions of a Nuclear War Planner. Tell us a little bit about your experience growing up in a household with someone like Daniel Ellsberg, and let us know how we can carry on his legacy for years to come.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very honored to be with this group. I really enjoyed listening to everyone who spoke before. I thought that Chris Appy in particular really captured so much about him. The thing that made me smile in your introduction was when you said you would carve out 15 minutes for my father to speak. I assumed that you told him he only had 5 minutes to speak, and you were hoping that that would confine him to 15 minutes. He was not a man of few words, but I will try to stay within the 7 minutes that I was assigned tonight. As Chris mentioned, almost all the obituaries and tributes following my father's death last year focused on his role in releasing the Pentagon Papers and thus his contribution to ending the Vietnam War. But they almost entirely overlooked the principal preoccupation of his life, and certainly the work of the last 50 years. That is, doing everything he could to avert the danger of nuclear war. That preoccupation preceded by many years his engagement with Vietnam, though it initially took the form of his work as a defense analyst, or as he would later term it, a nuclear war planner. Beginning in the late 1950s, immersed in Cold War ideology and equipped with the highest security clearances, he believed that the greatest way to prevent nuclear war was through deterrence. He felt this was work of the highest importance. But as he delved into the heart of the nuclear war planning system, he came increasingly to see it as a kind of madness and evil that must be unmasked and dismantled. One of the critical turning points came for him in 1961 when he was shown a Pentagon document indicating the expected fatalities that would result from their existing plans for nuclear war. That number was 600 million. This piece of paper, he believed, quote, depicted evil beyond any human project ever. From that point on, he said he had one overriding life purpose: to prevent the execution of this plan. Yet, as he later learned, the dangers were even more significant than he had realized at the time. The plan omitted any calculation of the effect of smoke lofted into the atmosphere from burning cities. Scientists later determined that the effect of the smoke would be to induce a new global ice age, freezing rivers, killing the crops and vegetation on which all creatures depend. The number of 600 million was actually a fantastic underestimate. It's now 40 years since these first scientific calculations became available, and yet to this day, military planners and political leadership in the nuclear-armed nations continue to act as if this danger does not actually exist. The public remains largely unfamiliar with this threat. And so my father came to see that the major nuclear powers, particularly the US and the Soviet Union, had each constructed a doomsday machine, quote, a very expensive system of men, machines, electronics, communications, practices, and doctrine, which under conditions of electronic warning would with unknowable and possibly high probability bring about the global destruction of civilization and of nearly all human life on Earth. Following the Vietnam War, he returned full-time to his efforts to enlighten the public and offer resistance to this mad system. He lectured, lobbied, gave thousands of speeches and countless interviews. He was arrested almost 100 times. Lastly, he wrote his memoir, The Doomsday Machine, Confessions of a Nuclear War Planner. When Dad learned last year that he had inoperable pancreatic cancer, it almost seemed to come as a relief. Though he continued to speak and conduct interviews as long as he was able, he seemed to feel that the personal weight of his mission was being lifted from his shoulders. He felt no optimism about the future. Indeed, between climate change and the nuclear threat, especially in light of the crisis in Ukraine, he saw very dark times ahead. He expressed regret that he was leaving the stage with so much work to be done and seemingly so little to show for all his efforts. And he called himself a person of hope. He said that this was not the same as optimism. It was a way of acting, a way of living hopefully, as if real change were possible. He said it would take a miracle to spare us the consequences of our policies, but he believed, even in his own secular terms, that miracles were possible. The fall of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of apartheid, these were miracles. The fact that we had survived the Cuban Missile Crisis and dozens of other near misses was a kind of miracle. which had bought us and our planet extra time, provided we had the wisdom and will to make use of it. The first step was to introduce into our political analysis and discussion of nuclear policies the recognition, quote, that what is being discussed is dizzyingly insane and immoral in its almost incalculable and inconceivable destructiveness and deliberate murderousness, its criminality to a degree that explodes ordinary visions of law, justice, crime, its lack of compassion, its sinfulness and evil. In a letter he sent to friends in the peace movement, which went viral, he spoke of the hope he placed in those who would carry on the struggle. One person raising a protest would not do it, but many people joining together all around the world, insisting that no nation or group of nations inspired by any principle or ideology whatsoever has the right to threaten the existence of all other nations and every person on the planet. That just might be the beginning of a miracle. He said that his central message might be this, that you can't know what you will accomplish, and you may never know the results of your actions. But in light of what is at stake, the chance that you can make a difference is worth taking. And at the end of the day, that's a good way to use your life. He would be very grateful to be remembered by those here tonight who were part of what he called his tribe, the truth tellers, the peacemakers, the resistors, who care about the others and are prepared to do what is in their power to choose life and affirm the possibility of a different world. His greatest honor was to be counted as part of that movement. And his last wish for his friends and comrades, which would include everyone here tonight, was this, quote, that at the end of your days, you will feel as much joy and gratitude as I do now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert, for sharing that with us. One of the biggest concerns that this genocide in Gaza really rises is a threat of a regional war, right? We just recently saw what happened as Iran retaliated against Israel bombing their embassy in Syria. And really, it brings me great pleasure to have Dr. Assal here with us tonight, who can take us through what that looks like really in the region, especially what we're facing if this war does not stop, and how to prevent really a regional war in that area. Dr. Assal, a dear friend, is a scholar of Middle East history. She works on research and writing related to U.S. foreign policy issues, the Middle East, and contemporary Iran. Her writing can be seen in Newsweek, The National Interest, The Independent, Foreign Policy, and more. And she has appeared as a commentator on BBC World, Al Jazeera, CNN, and NPR. She completed her PhD in history from the University of California, Irvine in 2018, and is the author of The State of Resistance, Politics, Culture, and Identity in Modern Iran, which I really highly recommend for everyone to purchase a copy. And what I will do is I'll share Dr. Rod's Twitter handle. She's one of the most vibrant voices on peace on social media. And so I thank you from the bottom of my heart for the work that you're doing, and for the strength that you have to carry on this mission of anti-war movement. So please take it away, Dr. Rod, and take us through what this all looks like in that region.
Thank you, Hanieh, for the very generous introduction. And I really enjoyed, I'm happy to be here with all of you, and I really enjoyed listening to everyone who's speaking. It's at a time when I think things look very dark and things look very grim. It's refreshing and heartening to be in the presence of so many people who are, at their heart, I think the discussion, while we talk about Daniel Ellsberg, while we talk about anti-war movements, when we talk about nuclear weapons, at the heart of it is peace, right? That's what everyone here is talking about. That's what everyone here wants to see. And specifically, when you talk about the region, obviously, that's what is getting a lot of attention currently. And we were very worried about the idea of this war right now in Gaza, Israel's war on Gaza, I should say, expanding within the region and what that could mean. And does that mean, the US is going to be drawn into yet another war in the Middle East and its many endless wars? And I think what's interesting about the way that the conversation is often framed is when, for instance, if you look at this last month, we look at the month of April and right midway through the month, there was a lot of fear. World War III is because of Iran's response to its embassy attack on Israel. Is this going to lead to a larger war? And what I found interesting in the framing, and I sort of always find interesting when you look at these things, is there wasn't the same fear when Israel attacked Iran's embassy earlier in that month, right? Because the idea is never that we, the United States, or our allies are a problem or the problem or do anything wrong. The problem is always someone else. We're always pointing in another direction. It's not when Israel attacks a consulate that this might create a war. It's only if Iran responds to it. It's not decades of occupation that might be the problem. It's October 7th. That is the only problem. It's not a genocidal campaign on Gaza that is the problem. It's the reaction of students in America trying to stop that war from happening. So we're always pointing the finger at someone else. And what I thought is interesting about that is this isn't, if we put our expert hats aside, without having any expertise in anything, without even talking about these subjects, on a basic human level, we can understand how that's a problem. Anyone can understand that. Anyone can see in any human interaction, if you're always blaming someone else, if your finger is always pointing somewhere else, this is not an honest conversation that we're having. You're not having an honest conversation when that's what you're doing. And that's what we're doing as a country. And the reason I point out the US specifically and why it's important, number one, because we're all Americans, we're sitting in this country. So it's important to use our voices, our platforms, whatever freedoms we still have to say these things. But also because there is a reality that the US, despite an emerging multipolar world, which is true, the US is still by far the most powerful country in the world. It has the power to impact things in a way that no other country can do. And when you look at anti-war movements, right? When you look at this idea of being anti-war, who is the number one, who's selling the most weapons in the world? The US. Who is spending the most on military? The US. By far, again, these margins are astronomically different. And so we cannot have hundreds of military bases around the world, spend the most money on weapons, make the most weapons, sell the most weapons, and then say we are a country that is peaceful. That what we want is peace, but we want to bring that peace through as much weaponry as possible. We can't talk about wanting to stabilize a region that we constantly impose our own violence on and throw our own weapons at. So in trying to understand what we can do as part of this anti-war movement, I do think that there has to be some specific concentration on the actions of our own government and how it upends the ability of the international community to act, right? So this is all about, we're talking about being anti-war, we're talking about the fear of not just nuclear proliferation, which is its own existential threat, but we face another one, right? Climate is another existential threat that we face. And unless we can work together, unless we can cooperate outside of our own borders, within our own borders, but of course outside of our own borders, then we will not be able to tackle either of those issues. And what was the international community created for? It was created, if you look at the UN Charter, the central point of the United Nations is to avoid the scourge of war, right? It is essentially an anti-war institution. That's why the UN exists. The UN exists to stop wars from happening. And right now, when you look at what's happened in Gaza, remember that calls for a ceasefire, and Pastor Mike pointed this out, you guys were calling for a ceasefire back in October. Thank you for doing that. As were so many people in this world, as were international institutions. And now, 7 months later, there is still no ceasefire because the US undermined every attempt at a ceasefire, whether it was vetoing ceasefire resolutions at the United Nations or abstaining finally, and then deciding to say that resolutions of the United Nations are non-binding. this repeated shredding of the international system, of international rules and law, in order to protect our allies, in order to protect Israel from basically acting with absolute impunity, is undermining the entire system that was built in order to stop wars from happening. So while we can focus on Gaza, because Gaza in and of itself, the human suffering, the horror that we are seeing in Gaza is enough for us to act and continue to resist, it is indicative of something much, much bigger. If we cannot stop a genocide from happening in the 21st century, how will we tackle the issues of non-proliferation, of climate, that will require cooperation from everybody, right? Climate does not know borders. A nuclear holocaust does not know borders. Those borders do not matter when you are dealing with these types of threats. But we cannot do it as long as, and this is I think the specific and particular responsibility we have as Americans, as long as our own country stops that from happening. And right now we're seeing empire, the boomerang, the imperial boomerang come home. We're seeing the effects of that kind of militarism, the idea that we believe that violence is the only way, the only solution to any problem. That is what we're unleashing on, of all groups within our country, our youth, our young people, our students. We have to address the problems at home. We have to address the problems in our own country. And we have to address those things if we want to tackle any of these larger issues that we have. And I'll just give one note, because I know, Hanieh, you wanted me to talk more about the region at large, and specifically my background as someone who works on Iran. Something to keep in mind about nuclear proliferation, Iran, the Middle East, Israel, the US, how is this all tied together? Well, there was something called the Iran nuclear deal back in 2015. And according to non-proliferation experts, this was a landmark agreement, not only because of its detente between Iran and the United States, two adversarial states, which showed that's what diplomacy is for. Diplomacy works with adversaries. You don't need diplomacy with your friends. You need it with your enemies. But that it was also a landmark agreement because it was basically the most oversight over a country's nuclear program that had ever existed. The two countries that came eventually to undermine this agreement were the United States itself under the Trump administration and Israel. Because one of the things that we also don't acknowledge about Israel, while we're supporting with absolute impunity everything that it's doing, is that Israel is the only nuclear-powered state in the Middle East currently. Something that we don't even acknowledge in the United States. And while Iran and other states in the region would have argued for making the Middle East a nuclear-free zone, which would be a huge non-proliferation gain, guess who the two states are that are against this? The United States and Israel. Why do I point this out? Because that's the level to which the US has power and has influence in things that happen, whether it's non-proliferation, whether it's war, whether it's what's specifically happening in Gaza today. And so my hope and my message to everyone, and I think everybody here has echoed this, is that we have to keep doing the work. And we have to keep doing it at home more than anywhere else, because we are more responsible for it.
Thank you from the bottom of my heart, Dr. Rod, for your beautiful and important remarks. Please do let us know how folks can get in contact with you. I shared your Twitter account with our audience members. And hopefully later in the evening, again, we will be joined by Ryan Black, who will talk to our audience about organizing more for Daniel Ellsberg's Week of Action, which ties into really the mission of peace, right? So just to kind of continue on Dr. Rod's point, I want to introduce Emma Claire Foley, who is the program director for Defuse Nuclear War, and she's an expert in disarmament and non-proliferation, who is a former member of the research and policy team at Global Zero, and she's graduated with a master's degree from Harvard's Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies in May of 2018. Her interest in disarmament really stems from years of living and working in Ukraine, where she became interested in the connections between environmental conservation and nuclear secrecy. In her research, writing, and translation work, she attempts to bring the experience of the American and post-Soviet nuclear aftermaths of the Cold War into conversation as a way of contributing to a global vision of a livable future. Emma Claire, can you tell us a little bit about the role that Saudi also plays in all of this a bit, but continuing on what Dr. Rod was talking about, what are some of the solutions and what is the message that we're learning here?
Yeah, of course. Really heartening to hear what's been said so far. There's such an amazing diversity of perspectives and experiences on display here. So just appreciative, and hopefully I can add a few notes to that. Can everyone hear me? Awesome. Okay. I realize my mic is not plugged in. I'm still talking in it. Yeah, so I can sort of frame this generally and then talk specifically about the Saudi issue, which is that, when I think about talking about how to connect what's going on in Gaza with nuclear weapons, I think there are it's almost like so big and obvious that you can't really see it, if that makes sense, right? You can think about, on the one hand, nuclear weapons is kind of this guarantor of impunity, right? On the US part, of course, but then you also see Israel with its nuclear weapons program that, we can't even be spoken about. You also see today in the United States, the defense budget is, moving very closely towards $1 trillion, money that will go to the same companies that are producing the US armaments that are flowing into Israel and are sort of benefiting from the maximalist approach to the nuclear arsenal seems to be taken by the Biden administration and within Congress. So I think when we're talking about these two issues together, it's important to kind of frame them in that way, I think. But we also have the specific issue of Saudi Arabia's sort of role in this whole picture. I've been, concerned about, as someone who thinks about, the potential of proliferation and the shifting politics of nuclear weapons, I've been concerned for a while about the nuclear deal that has been, Saudi leaders and many in the US have pushed for between US and Saudi Arabia as part of this, normalization deal that is supposed to take place between the US and Saudi Arabia. That status of that is in question at this moment, of course, but all of this is to say specifically with the nuclear issue that it would allow for the US to ostensibly provide aid facilities, materials for a Saudi non-weapons program, nuclear power program. This would be based on uranium deposits that are in theory present in Saudi Arabia that have been explored with the help of Chinese companies. It's not clear how much is there and whether it could support a power or a weapons program. But this is, many are eagerly pressing for this kind of deal, part of this larger sort of, the US trying to get the Middle East exactly as it wants it and sort of prevent, those who would sort of assert their own request for justice as a priority, to prevent them from having any say. So the thing to keep in mind though with this is that the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia has said at least on 2 occasions in US media that should Iran develop a nuclear weapon, right? Saudi Arabia would do so as well. And these statements are made sort of blithely with no indication that it might encounter any obstacles in starting up a military nuclear program. And I think, this level of sort of, shamelessness in talking about the potential proliferation, which is not met with any kind of sufficient or reasonable level of pushback from the Biden administration, is just one way in which this kind of escalation or an attitude towards this no holds bar attitude toward this attack on and the potential expansion of war throughout the Middle East and intensification kind of just looks away from any bigger consequences, and certainly any of the larger consequences for something like nuclear escalation or a general increase in the possibility of nuclear conflict or nuclear use. I'm a little tired, and I just did another speaking thing, so I feel like I've spoken enough. I think I covered all the points I wanted to, and I'm eager to hear from everyone else. So I'll stop there. But thank you all.
Thank you, colleague and friend Emma Claire Foley. If you have any questions, and I'm saying this to our audience members, please do feel free to either post them in the chat. Unfortunately, we don't have a Q&A session this evening, but I'm more than happy to forward those questions to our speakers. To our speakers, if you wish to share your information and your email addresses with our audience members, please do so in the chat so they can get in contact with you and support your mission for peace and justice. And to kind of tie everything together, Jeffrey Sterling, who better than Jeffrey Sterling to talk about his experience and the pain that he had to go through as a whistleblower and a former CIA case officer. And so, Jeffrey, I wanted to kind of have you conclude our dialogue here with what that looked like, and tell us a little bit about your experience. And then we'll go to Ryan Black to tell us exactly what we're planning for the Daniel Ellsberg Week of Action. Jeffrey Sterling is, as I mentioned, a former CIA case officer who was at the agency, including the Iran task force, for nearly a decade. He's a wealth of experience and knowledge on this issue, and I've had the privilege of speaking with you about the Iran task force a bit over the phone, Jeffrey. He filed an employment discrimination suit against the CIA, but the case was dismissed as a threat to national security. He served 2.5 years in prison after being convicted of violating the Espionage Act. No indiscriminating evidence was produced at the trial, and Jeffrey continues to profess his innocence. His memoir, Unwanted Spy, The Persecution of an American Whistleblower, was published in late 2019, and I will share this information with our attendees in the chat so they can purchase your book. But Jeffrey, please do take it away.
Excuse me. Thank you, Hanieh. It's an honor to be a part of this panel. But overall, I do feel like this is about Daniel Ellsberg and what he meant for just the country in general. I think we are still reaping the benefits of that. I think we see a little bit of Daniel Ellsberg in the protests on the campuses. I always think whenever I see an issue pop up, it pops into my head, what would Daniel Ellsberg do, sort of thing. But, what he meant to me, and I just want to say a few things about him. It's like when I was going through being persecuted by the Espionage Act, I mean, there's only at that time, a finite number of people who had gone through that experience. And when I emerged from prison, the Daniel Ellsberg reached out to me. And, that's the value that he had, that he showed. I mean, he didn't rest on his laurels. He supported whistleblowers, and he was there for me. Sometimes as a whistleblower, you feel very alone. You don't want to feel like you want to do the right thing. And you can't imagine that doing the right thing could mean losing so much. Daniel Ellsberg understood that. Daniel Ellsberg went through that. He shared with me his experiences, and that helped uplift me, as a whistleblower, especially when I emerged from prison. He reminded me that, I survived it, that I'm much more than that ordeal I went through. And I look and say, wow, this great man, he's been arrested 100 some odd times. I've been arrested once, and I felt like my whole world fell apart. But he let me know that there was still hope. that there was still something to do. And that's the thing about Daniel Ellsberg. He continued. He was telling us that, there are those in power who have no interest in peace. I mean, the Pentagon Papers, there was no interest in peace there. It's just continue with the military-industrial complex. Well, when I was working at the CIA, particularly with regard to the Iran Task Force and counterproliferation, I also worked in the counterproliferation division in the agency. There was really no interest in peace. There was an interest in just keeping the machine going. If there was ever talk of peace, it's like, well, who defined that peace? Who defines the peace that we supposedly want in the Middle East? Is it taken into consideration other countries other than Israel? I saw that firsthand in our intelligence community. There was no interest in peace. What Daniel Ellsberg was showing was that there are those out there who are those in power who are taking us down dangerous paths, and we need to call them to account for it. I saw that firsthand. With regard to what I blew the whistle on, one, it was discrimination at the CIA, and also a faulty program, a dangerous program that was designed to thwart or stop the Iranian nuclear program, but instead, all of the assurances that I was given were false. And so, therefore, it actually would have helped the Iranian nuclear program. So it's like, what is the goal here? What is the purpose? I had to question that. And I risked everything. I blew the whistle on it. But you know what? I had that, I didn't think about him when I blew the whistle. I didn't think about Daniel Ellsberg at that time. But I knew that he was like the quintessential whistleblower. He stood up to power. He said no. He's like, this is what is happening. The country, the world needs to know. And I felt what I was experiencing, the hawks and the just constant barragement of Iran is evil. We need to get rid of Iran. And we're hearing this again. We need to attack Iran. They have nuclear weapons. They're a danger to the region. So getting rid of Iran will cause peace. But who is defining that peace? That peace is only being defined by the U.S. and our partners. I was there on the front lines, essentially, of seeing how this worked. It's like, okay, we don't want Iran to have nuclear weapons, but so the U.S. is the only one that is capable enough to mature enough to have a nuclear weapon. And that's another thing that Daniel Ellsberg said, maybe some things that I don't think I have much in common with him, other than being persecuted by the Espionage Act. But, there's that aspect of nuclear weapons. He was tireless in his efforts to eradicate nuclear weapons, bring the danger, the insanity of nuclear weapons, take away that veil. And, I saw that the dangers of nuclear, the dangers that are posed by countries having nuclear weapons. And, it was just like, it is an insanity. And now we have talk of people, normalizing nuclear weapons. They're like, oh, well, you'll hear military hawks talking about tactical nuclear weapons. There's no such thing as a tactical nuclear weapon. It's either a nuclear weapon that causes complete destruction, or it's something that just does not need to be used and no one needs to have it. Those are the lessons and the truths that Daniel Ellsberg was trying to show to us. And again, I think there is a little bit of Daniel Ellsberg. These students are standing up, and it is our duty to support them. They're having the police are being weaponized against them. Weaponized against them for what? For standing up for the truth, for trying to call power into account. That's exactly what Daniel Ellsberg did. He had an indelible impact on me in my life, especially after going through the ordeal I did. I think there is a huge void that has been left by his passing. But along the way, he showed us how to fill that void, that it doesn't have to be empty. That what was great about Ellsberg to me was that, when you look down at it, get rid of the layers. I mean, he's a very eloquent man, but he was a very simple man. He was fighting for the truth. And I think that's what these students are doing. I think that's what, people they're asking questions. Daniel Ellsberg said, ask the questions and demand the answers. And that's what the students are doing. They're being vilified for it, but their voices, maybe in a way, are being heard. And again, I can see a little bit of Daniel Ellsberg in those students and in anyone who's standing up to the aggression that's happening in the Middle East, and how the U.S. is just this, it's perpetual war. And he was a man about peace. And what he was showing us was that there are those in power who have no interest in peace. I mean, you think about it, peace doesn't sell. There's no profit to be made from peace, not in the military industrial complex. So I just, as a whistleblower, Daniel Ellsberg meant a tremendous amount to me. But just as an activist, I think he has meant the world to all of us. And I think there's always going to be whistleblowers. There's always going to be protests to have. And he's shown us the way. He showed us as a great example of, even if you have to risk everything, doing the right thing will overcome the difficulties that you go through for doing so. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey, for not only highlighting the impact that Daniel Ellsberg had in our history, but also the uprising of the students on college campuses. There's that famous quote that says, they buried us, but they didn't know we were seeds, right? So they can close these encampments down and another one will open up. And I do want to encourage our attendees here to find the nearest university closest to you and start attending if you haven't already, supporting these students in addition to providing them supplies. I know that they need food, they need chargers. Sanitation is what they're asking for. I know Cal State Los Angeles has just started their encampment and they're asking for sanitary items. So please make sure that you're in contact with some of the organizers. But we are almost out of time, and I do want to hand this off to RootsAction's wonderful organizer and my esteemed colleague, whom I have the pleasure of organizing with for the past few years, Ryan Black, who will take us through exactly what the Daniel Ellsberg's Week of Action looks like as of now and what we're hoping to achieve, building on 2023, which was very successful. And after that, we'll go ahead and end the program. So again, to our speakers, if you want for folks to get in contact with you, please do share your information in the chat, and I will hand it off to Ryan.
Thank you so much, Hanieh, and thank you everybody else. It's been a fantastic call. And important stuff we're talking about here, especially with what's going on around the world and the college campuses all over the United States and now spreading to Europe. The quote, Christian Appy mentioned it when he was speaking, what Dan said when he was arrested, wouldn't you go to prison to help end this war? It reminded me of the father, I think it was at UCLA, who the news was trying to get him to say he was scared that his daughter would get in trouble, but he said, no, I would be proud of her and I would go to jail with her and we would be proud because it's the right thing to do. So you see that vein of Daniel Ellsberg living on to in people today who are protesting. I think that's wonderful. Time to talk action now. So what can we do about war, about Gaza, and importantly for me at Defuse Nuclear War, about ICBMs, which is what Dan was really working hard on. June 10th to 16th is Daniel Ellsberg Week, and we have over 30 organizations and individual organizers across the country who have already signed up to take action about ICBMs for Daniel Ellsberg and against war and for peace, most importantly. We have actions planned right now in San Francisco, LA, Minneapolis, Tampa, Massachusetts, all over, Hawaii, Milwaukee, Seattle, Fresno, New York, Asheville, Santa Fe, lots of cities. There's things going on everywhere, even people just writing their paper or submitting resolutions to their city council, which is super important. So what all is everybody doing? We have organizations signed up right now to host vigils. We have picket lines. We have people writing letters to the editors, which we have a template for on our website, which I will post now. Did I freeze up? Am I still here?
You're still here.
Okay, excellent. If you go there, you can find all of these resources. We also have, I just clicked out of everything. We also have people writing op-eds, which if you want help with that, please reach out to us. We can help you in the process of writing it and then ultimately pitching it and getting it published places. We have templates for a local resolution to honor Daniel Ellsberg and Daniel Ellsberg Week. We have a template for a local resolution to send to your city council affirming the need to eliminate ICBMs, which is a big one. If we can have cities across the country banding together to say no to ICBMs, that can make effects on states and make effect on the federal level eventually. We have people trying to rename roads, schools, libraries. Again, contact us if you're interested in doing something like that. We're also doing educational activities. If you go to the website I posted, you can click to sign up and you have the opportunity to sign up for a Nuclear Weapons 101 workshop or a Media Training for Activists workshop. All good stuff to get involved and to bring people in your local community, people you organize with together to focus on ICBMs, on nuclear weapons, on preventing war. And lastly, if you go to that website, there's just a ton of information and content about Dan. There's a podcast he recorded. There's graphics you can share on social media of his quotes. Many of those quotes have been repeated tonight. There's articles and videos featuring him. So I strongly urge you to go there, share some of that content, look at all the tons and tons of resources we have on there, and sign up to do something, to take action. We will guide you. We will help you the whole way. We will make it as easy as possible. It's not scary, I promise. And the only way we get change is if lots and lots and lots of us do something. So that's my spiel. Thank you so much, Hanieh.
Of course, of course. And what I am so impressed by is that the number of our audience members has not moved. So everyone's still here, everyone's still aware, and everyone is still eager to participate. So I wanted to, again, thank RootsAction Education Fund, as well as the Ellsberg's Initiative for Peace and Democracy for leading on the Daniel Ellsberg Week of Action. I do want to thank our speakers, Pastor Michael McBride, Professor Christian Appy, Robert Ellsberg, Emma Claire Foley, Jeffrey Sterling, Dr. Assal, and our very, very own Norman Soloman and Ryan Black for being a part of such an incredible event. Again, as I said earlier, do participate in encampments, do join us for Defuse Nuclear Wars Week of Action, and keep really just visit our website for other initiatives that we do have coming up. If you want a copy of this recording, we will have it on our website, thanks to the hard work of Ryan Black, and it'll be on YouTube as well. I want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart for being here, and I look very much forward to collaborating with each and every one of you until Palestine is free and there are no wars and we're completely nuclear free. I wish you a happy evening. Thank you.